The marina was peaceful that Sunday afternoon, with the scent of salt water mingling with the tang of fresh paint from nearby boats. Lieutenant Sarah Blake, now retired, was soaking in the tranquility aboard her modest sailboat. The sound of seagulls punctuated the occasional soft laughter from other boat owners. Her paperback novel lay open on her lap, but her mind wandered to the gentle rocking of her vessel, a simple pleasure she'd learned to cherish since leaving the service. The sudden roar of motorcycle engines shattered the calm, jolting Sarah from her reverie. A group of 6 bikers thundered into view, their leather jackets adorned with skull patches and chains that caught the sunlight. They parked haphazardly across multiple spaces, their loud voices and crude laughter drowning out the natural sounds of the marina. Beer cans clinked as they cracked open drinks, carelessly tossing the empties into the shimmering blue water. Sarah, clad in casual khakis and a navy tank top that revealed the edge of an anchor tattoo on her shoulder, approached them with the calm resolve that had served her well during countless missions. "Excuse me, this is a quiet marina. Could you please take your party elsewhere?" One biker, tall and burly with a thick beard streaked with gray, stepped closer, squinting at her as if she were a curiosity in a museum. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Can't handle a little fun?" The others guffawed, emboldened by their ringleader's bravado. "I'm asking politely. Don't litter or disturb the peace," Sarah replied, her voice steady but firm, carrying the weight of authority she'd earned through years of command. "Or what?" mocked another, smaller biker with a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You gonna call the cops?" When one biker began climbing onto her boat, Sarah's expression hardened, muscles tensing beneath her casual attire. "I said stop." He laughed, brushing off her warning until her swift grip on his arm made him yelp. A calculated twist later, he was flailing through the air before splashing into the water. Gasps from his comrades punctuated the splash, but Sarah wasn't done. She stepped back into a defensive stance, muscles taut, her gaze steady and unwavering. A slow, stunned silence fell over the marina as Sarah, Navy SEAL instincts sharp as ever, prepared for what would come next. The afternoon sun caught the determined glint in her eyes, and those watching knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Would you have stood up to the bikers like Sarah did? What would you do if you witnessed this scene unfold at your local marina? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes who refused to back down from bullies. The soaked biker emerged from the water sputtering curses, his leather jacket heavy with seawater and his pride wounded far deeper than any physical injury. His tattoo-covered arms trembled with rage as he pushed himself up onto the dock, leaving puddles in his wake. "You're gonna regret that, lady," he snarled, water dripping from his beard. Undeterred, Sarah remained calm, keeping her footing steady on the weathered planks as the others encircled her like wolves closing in on prey. She could read their body language with the practiced eye of someone who'd survived countless hostile situations. The slight shift of weight before an attack, the tensing of shoulders, the subtle glances between conspirators coordinating their moves. One pulled out a pocket knife, flicking it open with a sinister grin that revealed tobacco-stained teeth. The blade caught the afternoon sun, sending a warning glint across the marina. 2 others spread out to her flanks, their boots scraping against the dock's wooden surface as they positioned themselves for what they assumed would be an easy takedown. The marina staff and several onlookers watched from a distance, frozen in place, their phones held up to record what was unfolding but unsure how to intervene without escalating the situation. A mother hurriedly ushered her children away from the scene, while an elderly couple retreated to the safety of their cabin cruiser. Sarah, however, stayed razor-focused, her Navy SEAL training transforming her awareness into a hyperactive radar. Every movement, every sound registered with crystal clarity. The lapping of waves against the hulls, the creak of mooring lines, the subtle shift of weight as one biker prepared to lunge, it all filtered through her combat-honed senses. "You've got one chance to walk away," she said, her voice cutting through the rising tension like a knife through still water. Her words carried no bravado, no unnecessary threat, just the pure, cold certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. The wet bikers spat onto the dock. 6 against 1, lady. You might have got lucky once, but… Math was never my strong suit, Sarah interrupted, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. But I like those odds. Her calm demeanor only served to enrage them further. The one with the knife adjusted his grip, knuckles whitening around the handle. Hold her down, he barked to his companions. I'm gonna teach this bitch some respect. But they didn't heed Sarah's warning, and that would prove to be their second mistake. The first had been assuming she was alone. The first biker charged forward, leading with his shoulder like a football player going for a tackle. Sarah pivoted smoothly, her movements economical and precise. Her hand found his wrist, redirecting his momentum with the practiced ease of someone who had done this countless times before. He stumbled past her, crashing into one of his companions with a grunt of surprise. The knife wielder slashed at her midsection, but Sarah had already anticipated the move. She stepped inside his reach, trapped his knife arm against her body, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent him sailing through the air. The knife clattered across the dock, spinning away harmlessly as its owner landed hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. Last chance, Sarah offered, her breathing steady despite the exertion. Walk away while you still can. The remaining bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier confidence beginning to crack. The wet one, however, had revenge burning in his eyes. He pulled something from his back pocket, brass knuckles that glinted dully in the sunlight. You think you're tough? He growled, slipping the weapon onto his right hand. Let's see how tough you really are. Sarah's expression hardened. She recognized the look in his eyes, the dangerous combination of wounded pride and unbridled rage that often preceded the worst kinds of violence. Her mind flashed back to similar situations in far-off places, where hesitation meant death and mercy was often mistaken for weakness. The gathering crowd had grown larger now, their murmuring creating a backdrop of tension. Someone shouted that they'd called the police, but Sarah knew help wouldn't arrive in time to prevent what was coming. She could hear the distant wail of sirens, but they were too far away to matter. Don't do this, she warned one final time, shifting her weight to the balls of her feet. Whatever happens next is on you. The biker with the brass knuckles rolled his shoulders, water still dripping from his clothes. Get her, he commanded, and chaos erupted on the dock. 2 bikers rushed her from different angles, thinking to overwhelm her with sheer numbers. Sarah dropped and rolled, causing them to collide above her. As she came up, her elbow caught one in the solar plexus, doubling him over. The other received a palm strike to the nose that sent him staggering backward, blood streaming down his face. The wet biker charged in behind them, brass knuckles whistling through the air where Sarah's head had been a moment before. She ducked under the wild swing, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into a nearby tackle box. Fishing gear scattered across the dock as he went down hard. The Marina had transformed from a peaceful Sunday afternoon haven into a battleground. The sound of combat echoed off boat hulls and across the water. Grunts of pain, the thud of bodies hitting wood, and the increasingly desperate shouts of the bikers as they realized they'd severely underestimated their opponent. Sarah moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, each motion precisely calculated and executed. When one biker tried to grab her from behind, she stepped backward into him, using his own weight against him as she flipped him over her shoulder. He landed with a resounding crash that made the dock shudder. The knife wielder had recovered his weapon and was circling back, more cautious now but no less determined. His eyes darted between Sarah and his fallen companions, looking for an opening. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit the dock earlier, and his breathing was heavy with exertion and growing fear. You don't know who you're messing with, he spat, brandishing the knife. We've got friends. Lots of friends. This isn't over. Sarah's response was cut short by movement in her peripheral vision. The wet biker had recovered and was charging again, brass knuckles raised. She waited until the last possible moment before sidestepping, letting him stumble past her. His momentum carried him straight toward his knife-wielding friend, who had to dive out of the way to avoid being tackled. The collision that followed sent both men sprawling into a stack of fuel cans, creating a thunderous clatter that echoed across the marina. One of the cans rolled off the dock and splashed into the water, drawing curses from nearby boat owners. More spectators had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Some had their phones out, recording everything. Others watched with a mix of horror and fascination as this seemingly ordinary woman systematically dismantled a gang of aggressive bikers. "She's military," someone in the crowd whispered. "Has to be." "Special forces," another added. "Look at how she moves." The remaining bikers heard these comments, and uncertainty began to creep into their expressions. What had started as simple intimidation of what they thought was an easy target had turned into something else entirely. Their usual tactics of overwhelming force and intimidation weren't working, and for the first time, real fear began to show in their eyes. Sarah seized this moment of hesitation. "Your friends," she said, addressing the knife wielder's earlier threat, "better be smarter than you are, because this is your absolute last warning." Her voice carried the weight of command, the tone of someone used to being obeyed. "Drop the weapons. All of them. Now." Two of the bikers who were still standing exchanged glances, then looked to their leader, the one with the knife, for direction. He was breathing heavily, blood still trickling down his face, his earlier bravado cracking under the reality of their situation. The sirens were getting closer now, their wailing cutting through the tension like a knife. Several boats had pulled up alongside the dock, their occupants watching the scene unfold with a mixture of concern and amazement. Among them was an old fisherman who had served in Vietnam. He recognized the disciplined efficiency in Sarah's movements and nodded in quiet approval. The wet biker, still smarting from his multiple humiliations, pushed himself to his feet once more. His leather jacket was torn, and one of his skull patches hung by a thread. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled, spitting out a mouthful of blood. "This is our territory. We don't back down. Ever." "Your territory?" Sarah's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several onlookers step back. "This marina belongs to the people who work here, the families who spend their weekends on these docks, the fishermen who make their living on these waters. Not to thugs who think intimidation gives them ownership." Her words struck a chord with the gathering crowd. A weather dock worker, who'd stayed silent until now, called out, "She's right. We're tired of you boys throwing your weight around." The knife wielder's face contorted with rage. "Shut your mouth, old man, or you're next." But his threat came out shakier than he'd intended, undermined by the tremor in his hand as he brandished the knife. Sarah's eyes narrowed at the threat to the civilian. Her stance shifted subtly, and those with combat experience in the crowd recognized the change. She was done playing defense. The transformation was visible, like a switch being flipped. The casual boat owner disappeared, replaced by the warrior she'd once been. "That was your last mistake," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent dock. The wet biker, still holding his brass knuckles, made one final, desperate charge. Sarah moved like lightning, her hand catching his wrist in mid-swing. There was a sharp crack, followed by a howl of pain as the brass knuckles clattered to the dock. She had him on his knees in seconds, arm locked behind his back at an angle that promised agony if he so much as twitched. "Drop the knife," she commanded the leader, "or your friend here learns what it feels like when joints move in directions they're not supposed to." To emphasize her point, she applied slightly more pressure. The wet biker let out a strangled whimper, all his previous bravado evaporated. "Do what she says, man. Drop it." The knife wielder's face went through a rapid series of emotions: rage, fear, humiliation, and finally, defeat. The knife fell to the dock with a clatter that seemed to echo the group's failing bravado. "On your knees, hands behind your heads. All of you." Sarah's command left no room for argument. "The police will be here in about 30 seconds, and you're going to cooperate fully. Understand?" As if on cue, 2 police cruisers pulled into the marina parking lot, lights flashing. The remaining bikers, seeing their situation was hopeless, slowly complied with Sarah's orders. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Sarah maintained her focus, keeping the wet biker secured until the officers arrived. Marine patrol boats were approaching now too, their blue lights reflecting off the water. The afternoon sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the scene of what would become Marina legend. Several boat owners who had been intimidated by the bikers in the past were already approaching the police, eager to file their own complaints. The knife wielder, now kneeling with his hands on his head, finally found his voice again. "This ain't over," he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Sarah met his eyes with a steady gaze. "Yes, it is.
You just don't know it yet."
As the police began taking statements, the full scope of the bikers' activities at the marina came to light. Boat owners stepped forward one by one, sharing stories of vandalism, theft, and intimidation that had gone unreported out of fear. The afternoon's confrontation had broken a dam of silence, and now the truth came pouring out. Sarah stood to the side, giving her statement to a female officer who kept casting admiring glances at her efficient takedown holds. The wet biker was being treated by paramedics, his bravado completely deflated as they examined his wrist and shoulder. His companions sat handcuffed on the curb, their leather jackets looking considerably less intimidating in the fading afternoon light. "They've been running protection rackets up and down the coast," the marina manager explained to the police sergeant, demanding security fees from boat owners, threatening to damage vessels if people don't pay up. But nobody would testify until now. The knife wielder, now secured in the back of a patrol car, watched through the window as his empire began to crumble. His phone had been buzzing constantly, presumably calls from the friends he'd threatened to summon, but it now sat in an evidence bag, each message potentially another nail in his legal coffin. As the excitement began to die down, the marina community remained on the dock, clustering in small groups to discuss what they'd witnessed. The story was already growing in the telling. Each retelling made Sarah's moves more impressive, the bikers more menacing, the victory more decisive. "Did you see how she moved?" a young boat cleaner asked, demonstrating what he thought was one of Sarah's throws to his impressed audience. Like something out of an action movie. Sarah overheard these conversations with a mix of amusement and concern. She knew from experience that stories like this tended to travel fast, and that could mean complications. If these bikers really were part of a larger organization, today's events would likely draw unwanted attention. The dock worker who had spoken up earlier approached her, extending a weathered hand. "Name's Mike. Been working these docks for 30 years. Never seen anything like that, ma'am." Sarah shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of honest work. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Mike's expression turned serious. "Thing is, those boys, they're part of something bigger. The Skull Riders. They've got chapters all along the coast, and they don't take kindly to being embarrassed." A chill ran through the gathering crowd as they overheard Mike's words. The celebration dimmed somewhat as people considered the implications. The police might have these 6 in custody, but how many more might show up looking for revenge? Sarah's expression didn't change, but her mind was already racing through scenarios, evaluating threats and formulating plans. She'd faced worse odds in her military career, but this was different. This wasn't a mission with clear objectives and extraction plans. This was her home, her community, and the threat wouldn't disappear when the police drove away. As if reading her thoughts, Mike continued, "But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time somebody stood up to them. And maybe..." He glanced around at the gathered marina residents who were all listening intently now. "Maybe they need to learn that some communities fight back." The marina manager stepped forward, her keys jingling nervously in her hand. "We've got a meeting room in the office. Maybe we should talk about this. All of us." She looked at Sarah hopefully. "Would you be willing to help us figure out what to do next?" Sarah looked around at the faces turned toward her, the elderly couple who had retreated to their boat earlier, now standing tall with renewed courage, the young families who wanted their children to feel safe again, the workers who were tired of living in fear. She saw in their eyes the same look she'd seen in villages and towns across the world, people who had found the spark of resistance and needed only guidance to fan it into flame. "Yes," she said finally, "I'll help. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." The marina's meeting room wasn't designed for this many people. Every chair was taken, with dozens more standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The air conditioning struggled against the heat of so many bodies packed into the space, and the scent of coffee from a hastily arranged refreshment table mingled with the lingering smell of boat fuel and salt air. Sarah stood at the front of the room, her military training evident in her posture even in civilian clothes. The events of the afternoon had transformed her from a quiet boat owner into something else entirely, a leader, a protector, a symbol of resistance. She wasn't entirely comfortable with the role, but she recognized its necessity. "First things first," she began, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "We need to understand who we're dealing with. Mike, you seem to know about these skull riders. Tell us what we're up against." Mike stood, his weathered face grave. "They started small, maybe 5 years ago. Just another motorcycle club, or so everyone thought. But they grew. Started taking over marinas, boat yards, fishing docks, anywhere they could extort money from maritime businesses. They've got chapters in every major port from Maine to Florida." A silver-haired woman in sailing whites raised her hand. "I heard they've got legitimate businesses too. Front companies for smuggling operations." "Caroline's right." A deep voice came from the back of the room. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward, his bearing immediately marking him as military. "Name's Marcus Rodriguez, former Marine Corps intelligence. I've been tracking their activities since I moved here last year. They use fishing boats and private yachts to move contraband up and down the coast. The motorcycle gang is just the muscle." Sarah studied Marcus, recognizing a potential ally. "What else can you tell us?" "They're organized, professional. This isn't just some gang of thugs on bikes. They've got lawyers, accountants, people in local government. The 6 you took down today? They're just the tip of the iceberg." The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about standing up to bullies anymore. They were facing a criminal organization with deep roots and serious resources. "Then why hasn't anyone stopped them?" a young dock worker asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Because they're smart," Marcus replied. "They keep their legitimate businesses clean, launder their money well, and make sure no single person knows too much. And they're experts at intimidation. Most people are too scared to testify, and those who do often change their minds after unexpected accidents." Sarah noticed several people shift uncomfortably in their seats. The courage that had flared up during the afternoon's confrontation was wavering in the face of this larger threat. She needed to act quickly before fear took hold again. "That ends now," she said firmly, drawing all eyes back to her. "They've succeeded because they keep communities isolated, make each marina, each port think they're alone. But we're not alone anymore. I've got some contacts who might be interested in this situation," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "Former Marines who own boats up and down the coast. People who won't back down from a fight." A woman in her early 30s stood up, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Lisa Chun," she introduced herself. "I work in cybersecurity. Been documenting their online activities for months, social media, forum posts, financial transactions. Nothing concrete enough for law enforcement yet, but valuable intelligence for us," Sarah finished, nodding appreciatively. "What else do we have? What other skills and resources can we bring to bear?" The floodgates opened. A retired harbor master knew every hidden cove and unofficial anchorage in a 50-mile radius. A commercial drone operator offered aerial surveillance capabilities. 3 fishing boat captains volunteered their vessels and crews. Even the teenage son of a yacht owner stepped forward, explaining how he and his friends had been mapping the bikers' movements through social media. James Morton, a former Navy corpsman now running the Marina's boat repair service, raised his hand. "I've treated some of their victims. People who had accidents when they couldn't pay protection money. Got a whole file of documented injuries I've been keeping, just in case someone ever decided to take these bastards on." "We'll need secure communications," Lisa added. "I can set up encrypted channels, make sure they can't monitor our plans." Sarah watched as the room transformed. Where there had been fear, now there was purpose. Where there had been isolation, now there was community. But she also saw the weight of responsibility settling on these people's shoulders, and she knew they needed more than just courage and good intentions. "What you're all volunteering for," she said, her voice cutting through the growing excitement, "is not without risk. The Skull Riders will retaliate. They'll try to find our weak points, exploit our vulnerabilities. Anyone who stands with us needs to understand that." Marcus stepped forward again. "Then we remove those vulnerabilities. We protect each other. My security company can provide training, basic self-defense, situation awareness, emergency protocols. We make this community hard to intimidate." "I know some people in the Coast Guard," Caroline offered. "Unofficially, of course, but they might be interested in any information we gather about maritime smuggling operations." The Marina manager, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. "We've got cameras on every dock, but they're old systems. If we could upgrade them, add some of those new AI recognition capabilities." "I can help with that," Lisa said. "Set up a system that flags known Skull Riders, tracks unusual patterns of movement." Sarah felt a familiar sensation settling over her, the same focused clarity she'd experienced during mission planning in her SEAL days. This was different from direct combat. This was about building a network, creating infrastructure, preparing for a long-term operation. This was about transforming a vulnerable community into a hardened target. "We need to move fast," she said. "The 6 we caught today will be out on bail soon, if they're not already. And they'll report everything they saw to their leadership. We have maybe 48 hours before they test us again." The room grew quiet, the weight of that deadline settling over everyone. But there was no panic this time, no wavering resolve. Instead, Sarah saw determination in their eyes, the kind of steely focus she recognized from her military days, civilians becoming warriors, each in their own way. "Then let's get to work," Marcus said simply, and the room erupted into focused activity. The meeting room transformed into an impromptu command center. Lisa had commandeered a whiteboard, mapping out digital security protocols while James spread out his medical records on a folding table, working with Caroline to organize them into usable evidence. The air crackled with purpose and determination. A new face pushed through the crowd, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Detective Andrea Martinez," she announced quietly to Sarah. "Organized Crime Division. I've been building a case against the Skull Riders for 18 months. She glanced around the room. This might be exactly what we needed. Sarah studied the detective's face, reading the careful hope in her eyes. "Why come forward now?" "Because until today, no one stood up to them publicly. No one inspired others to follow. You changed that equation." Martinez pulled out her phone, showing Sarah a video that was already going viral, the afternoon's confrontation, captured from multiple angles. "They're not just thugs anymore. They're underdogs who got their asses handed to them by one woman. That damages their reputation, their mystique. Makes people wonder what else they could lose." Across the room, Marcus was organizing a security rotation. "We need eyes on the water and the parking lot 24/7, he was saying. "Teams of 3, 4-hour shifts. Nobody works alone." A young woman raised her hand, Amy Chen, Lisa's sister, Sarah remembered from the introductions. "I manage 3 coffee shops in the area. My baristas hear everything, see everything. We can be your eyes in the community." "Perfect," Marcus nodded. "We'll need." He was interrupted by Mike bursting into the room, slightly out of breath.
"They made bail," he announced.
"All 6 of them. Just got word from my contact at the courthouse." Sarah had expected this, but the news still sent a ripple of tension through the room. She watched faces carefully, looking for signs of wavering resolve, but saw only grim determination. "Good," she said, surprising everyone. "Now we know their timeline. They'll want to save face quickly, prove they're still in control. That makes them predictable." Detective Martinez nodded approvingly. "They'll try to re-establish dominance, but they'll be smart about it. No direct confrontation. That video's got them spooked. They'll go after soft targets first, try to isolate you. Then we remove the soft targets," Marcus said firmly. "Lisa, how long to get those security cameras upgraded?" "With help? 6 hours. I've got friends in IT security who owe me favors. They're already on their way. Sarah watched the interplay with growing approval. These people weren't soldiers, but they had skills that any military commander would envy: local knowledge, technical expertise, community connections. More importantly, they had the fierce determination of people protecting their home. A teenage girl who had been quietly observing from the corner suddenly spoke up. "My dad's on the city council," she said, her voice stronger than her nervous expression suggested. "He's been looking for a way to fight back against them ever since they threatened my little brother. He can help with permits, regulations, whatever we need." Sarah saw Detective Martinez make a note and realized the girl's father might be another potential ally in building a legal case. The network was growing, connections forming and strengthening with every passing minute. James approached with a stack of medical records. "I've got documentation of 37 injuries consistent with organized assault over the past year. All victims were boat owners or marina workers who reported pressure to pay protection money. None would testify before, but now they might," Martinez finished. "Especially if they know they're not alone." The sun had set outside, but no one seemed to notice the growing darkness. The meeting room hummed with energy as plans took shape, roles were assigned, and a community transformed itself into a resistance. As night fell over the marina, Sarah found herself on the deck of her sailboat with Marcus and Detective Martinez, reviewing security plans by the light of a battery-powered lantern. The water lapped gently against the hull, a peaceful counterpoint to their serious discussion. "Your boat gives us a tactical advantage," Marcus was saying, spreading out a marina map. "Clear sight lines to both entrances, and you can monitor radio traffic from here." He paused, studying Sarah's expression. "But it also makes you a target." "I'm counting on it," Sarah replied, marking positions on the map. "Better they focus on me than scatter their attacks across the community." Martinez shook her head admiringly. "You're using yourself as bait, more like a lightning rod." Sarah traced a line across the map. "Every minute they spend planning revenge against me is a minute we can use to strengthen our position." Below deck, Lisa was setting up a makeshift command center, her fingers flying over multiple laptops. The soft blue glow of screens illuminated her focused expression as she built their digital infrastructure. "Got the first batch of cameras online," she reported. "Facial recognition's running. Any Skull Rider shows up within half a mile of this place will know." The radio crackled, one of the fishing boats reporting in from their patrol of the harbor approaches. Sarah recognized Captain Chen's voice, Amy and Lisa's father, his calm professionalism masking the pride in his voice as he described his daughter's technical wizardry. A knock on the hull announced James, carrying his medical kit. "Setting up first aid stations at strategic points," he explained. "Taught basic trauma care to some volunteers. Not that we're expecting trouble, but always be prepared," Sarah finished. It was a lesson she'd learned the hard way in places far from here. More community members filtered through as the night progressed. Mike brought coffee and sandwiches from his wife's deli. Caroline arrived with updated tide charts and weather reports, crucial information for planning water-based operations. Even the teenage social media monitors had set up a station in the Marina office, tracking online chatter about the Skull Riders with a dedicated focus only digital natives could muster. "It's not just about fighting back," Martinez observed, watching the steady stream of visitors. "You're building something here. Something that'll last beyond this immediate crisis." Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper truth in the detective's words. Every person who stepped aboard brought not just their skills and resources, but their stories, their hopes, their determination to reclaim their community. Each connection forged tonight was another thread in a tapestry of resistance that would be harder to break than any individual strand. Around midnight, Lisa emerged from below deck with triumphant news. "Got something interesting," she announced, pulling up data on her tablet. Cross-referenced financial records with marine traffic patterns. The Skull Riders aren't just using private boats for smuggling, they're running a whole shadow fleet. Container ships registered to shell companies, fishing boats with suspiciously regular patterns. Martinez leaned forward, instantly alert. "That's the kind of paper trail I've been looking for." "How'd you find it?" People talk, especially online. Once I knew what to look for. Lisa's grin was fierce in the lantern light. Their operational security is good, but their accountants get sloppy. They never expected anyone to connect all the dots. Sarah watched the two women bend over the tablet, detective and hacker forming an unlikely but effective alliance. Around them, the Marina hummed with quiet activity, patrols changing shifts, communications being tested, plans being refined. They were as ready as they could be. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the Skull Riders' next move. The question wasn't if they would strike back, it was when and how hard. Dawn brought a new energy to the Marina. The night's preparations had transformed the community in subtle but significant ways. Security cameras gleamed from newly installed positions, their presence both a warning and a promise. Small groups of residents moved with purpose, conducting patrols with a quiet professionalism that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours ago. Sarah stood on her deck, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The Marina was coming alive with its usual morning activities, but there was a different atmosphere now, an undercurrent of readiness beneath the routine. First shift change went smooth, Marcus reported, climbing aboard with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah. Got spotters on every approach, water and land. Amy's coffee shop network is already paying off. Picked up chatter about Skull Rider movements in 3 neighboring towns. Lisa emerged from below deck, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she'd worked through the night. Got the last of the security systems integrated, she said, accepting a coffee from Marcus with grateful hands. And you're going to want to see this. She pulled up a series of images on her tablet, surveillance photos showing groups of bikers gathering at various locations within a 50-mile radius. They're mobilizing, she explained, calling in reinforcements from other chapters. I count at least 40 riders heading this way. Sarah studied the photos carefully. They're trying to overwhelm us with numbers. Standard intimidation tactic. That's not all, Detective Martinez said, approaching the boat. She'd just arrived, looking fresh despite the early hour. Got word from my contacts in other jurisdictions. The Skull Riders are pulling people off other operations, concentrating their forces. They're treating this as a major threat to their organization. Good, Sarah said simply. The harder they push, the more evidence they give us. A commotion at the Marina entrance drew their attention. James was leading a group of volunteers in unloading supplies, medical kits, communications equipment, even food and water stores. The community had spent the night gathering resources, preparing for whatever might come. We've got another advantage they don't know about, Martinez added, lowering her voice. That viral video of yesterday's fight? It's caught the attention of other communities under Skull Rider control. I'm getting calls from business owners, dock workers, even other police departments. People are watching, waiting to see what happens here. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. This wasn't just about one Marina anymore. It was about setting an example that others could follow. The Skull Riders knew it too, which made their response both more predictable and more dangerous. Mike approached, his weathered face serious. Got word from my cousin at the boatyard up north. Skull Riders just bought fuel for a dozen bikes. They're running light, no extra gear, no passengers. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. The morning breeze carried the sound of motorcycle engines in the distance, too far to be an immediate threat, but a reminder that time was running short. Sarah looked around at her unlikely coalition, the retired Marine turned security consultant, the tech-savvy sisters, the determined detective, the weathered dock workers, and dozens of ordinary citizens who had found their courage. They were as ready as they could be. The pieces were in place, the trap was set, and all that remained was to weather the coming storm. Send out the alert, Sarah ordered. All teams to positions. It's time to show the Skull Riders that they picked the wrong community to threaten. The Marina came alive with purposeful activity as her words spread. This was the moment when preparation would meet opportunity, when a community would stand or fall based on its courage and unity. The distant rumble of motorcycles grew louder. The motorcycles arrived in waves. First a scout group of 3 riders who circled the Marina's perimeter, then larger groups of 5 or 6, until the parking lot filled with the rumble of engines and the glint of chrome. The morning sun caught on leather jackets and helmet visors, creating an intimidating display of force. Sarah watched from her position on the boat, counting bikes through her binoculars. 43 riders, she reported into her radio. Just like Lisa predicted. Cameras are tracking, Lisa's voice crackled back. Facial recognition running. Already identified 12 with outstanding warrants. The Skull Riders' leadership emerged from the pack, a tall man with a gray-streaked beard and a leather vest covered in patches that marked him as the chapter president. Sarah recognized him from Martinez's intelligence briefings. Michael Iron Mike Kincaid, former military-turned-outlaw, with a rap sheet that included everything from assault to trafficking.
Lieutenant Blake.
His voice boomed across the marina. We hear you've been causing trouble for our brothers. Come out, and let's talk about it like professionals. Sarah kept her binoculars trained on the group, noting positions, weapons, escape routes. Through her earpiece, she could hear the quiet check-ins from the community's defensive positions, the fishing boats strategically positioned to block water exits, the observers in high points recording everything, the security teams ready to protect vulnerable areas. Interesting choice of words, she replied, her voice carrying clearly across the W. A tear. Professional criminals are still criminals. Iron Mike's laugh was harsh. Big words from someone who's about to learn a hard lesson about respect. You embarrassed my men yesterday. That can't go unanswered. Those men assaulted me on my own boat, Sarah countered, knowing her words were being recorded by multiple devices. I defended myself. Just like this community is going to defend itself from your exploitation. The chapter president's fake friendliness disappeared.
Last chance, Lieutenant.
Step aside, tell these people to go back to paying their dues, and we'll call it even. Nobody has to get hurt. Sarah finally lowered her binoculars, standing tall on her deck, where everyone could see her. Funny thing about dues, she said. They're supposed to be for services rendered. All you've done is take. Now it's time to pay your own dues. At her words, the marina's new security systems sprang to life. Bright floodlights snapped on despite the morning sun, temporarily blinding anyone not expecting them. High-definition cameras swiveled to capture every angle, their presence announced by Detective Martinez's voice booming over the marina's PA system. Attention, Skull Riders. You're being recorded. Every face, every license plate, every weapon is being documented. Some of you have outstanding warrants. Others are violating parole by associating with known felons. Make your choices carefully. The bikers shifted uneasily, some reaching for weapons while others glanced around at the cameras. Iron Mike's face darkened with rage. You think cameras scare us? He snarled. We own this coast. No evidence, no witnesses, no prosecution ever sticks. You're just making this harder on yourselves. Check your phones, Sarah suggested calmly. Confusion rippled through the biker ranks as phones began buzzing and chirping with notifications. Lisa's cyber team had sprung their trap. Every Skull Rider's social media account, email, and messaging platform was being flooded with evidence of their crimes, collected over months of surveillance, and now impossible to delete. Interesting business model you have, Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet marina. Shell companies, smuggling routes, money laundering through legitimate businesses. All documented, all traceable, all being uploaded to multiple secure servers right now. Iron Mike's face contorted with rage. You're bluffing. You couldn't. Account numbers. Lisa's voice cut through the marina's speakers, reading off a series of digits. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Panama. Should I continue? The chapter president's hand tightened on his handlebars until his knuckles went white. Several of his lieutenants gathered around him, speaking in urgent whispers. The power dynamic was shifting, and everyone could feel it. You think this changes anything? Iron Mike shouted, but his voice carried an edge of desperation now. You think some computers and cameras can stop us? We're the Skull Riders. We take what we want. He revved his engine, a signal to his men. Several bikes roared to life, moving to surround Sarah's boat. But they'd fallen into another trap. The marina's fuel dock suddenly erupted in activity. High-pressure hoses activated, creating a barrier of spray between the bikers and their targets. The water wasn't aimed at the riders directly. That would have been assault, but it made the ground treacherously slick for motorcycle tires. 2 bikes went down immediately, their riders cursing as they struggled to keep their machines from sliding into the water. Others backed away hastily, creating chaos in their tight formation. Fun fact about Marina fire suppression systems. Marcus's voice came over the PA. They're designed to create safe zones during emergencies.
Like now.
More systems activated across the marina, herding the bikers into increasingly confined spaces. It was crowd control through environmental manipulation, and it was working perfectly. Last warning, Sarah announced. Leave now, while you can still ride out with some dignity. Stay, and every law enforcement agency on the coast gets a complete dossier on your operations. Iron Mike gunned his engine again, but this time fewer bikes responded. His carefully cultivated image of invincibility was cracking, and his men could sense it. Some were already backing away, unwilling to risk their freedom for a losing battle. This isn't over, he snarled, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Actually, Detective Martinez stepped out from behind a storage unit, badge gleaming. For some of you, it is. She was flanked by state police officers who had been waiting out of sight. Michael Kincaid, you're under arrest for racketeering, extortion, and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. We've been building this case for months. Your little show of force here just gave us the probable cause we needed. The marina erupted in chaos as bikes started up and riders scattered, but they quickly discovered that retreat wouldn't be simple. The community's fishing boats had maneuvered to block the water routes, while strategically parked vehicles narrowed the exit roads to single lanes, easily monitored and controlled. As Iron Mike was being cuffed, a desperate lieutenant tried to rally the remaining riders. Are we gonna let them do this to us? We're Skull Riders. We don't back down. His battle cry sparked a surge of violence. 3 riders gunned their engines, aiming straight for the police line. Others pulled weapons, chains, brass knuckles, the tools of intimidation they'd relied on for so long. But the community was ready. Fire hoses deployed again, this time with precision, cutting off escape routes and separating groups of riders. From the surrounding boats, dozens of cameras recorded every move, every assault, every weapon brandished. Got their faces, Lisa reported over the radio. Sending profiles to law enforcement now. 10 more with outstanding warrants, 3 on parole. The riders who had charged the police line found themselves boxed in by expertly positioned trucks, the marina's delivery vehicles, driven by community members who knew every inch of the property. What had seemed like random parking now revealed itself as tactical positioning. Sarah watched from her boat as the carefully laid trap closed. Some riders tried to break through the barricades, only to find their bikes' tires shredded by hidden spike strips. Others attempted to flee on foot, but quickly discovered that every exit had been calculated, every escape route monitored. You don't understand, Iron Mike shouted as officers led him away. This is bigger than you know. You have no idea what's coming. Actually, Martinez replied calmly, we do. Your organization's encrypted communications? Not so encrypted anymore. We know about the shipment coming in tonight, the one hidden under legitimate cargo. Coast Guard's already moving to intercept. The color drained from Iron Mike's face as he realized the full extent of their intelligence gathering. This wasn't just about one marina standing up to intimidation. It was about months of surveillance, documentation, and coordination all coming together in a single, devastating operation. The remaining Skull Riders found themselves facing an impossible choice: surrender to the police or try to flee through a gauntlet of cameras, witnesses, and strategically placed obstacles. Some chose surrender, dropping their weapons and kneeling with hands raised. Others tried to run, only to find themselves caught in the community's web of surveillance and coordination. Target moving south on Pier 3. A young voice crackled over the radio, one of the teenage spotters in their observation post. Got him on camera 4, Lisa confirmed, sending coordinates to ground team. The precision of the response was devastating. Every attempted escape, every act of violence, every criminal violation was documented from multiple angles, making future prosecution all but certain. The Skull Riders' usual tactics, intimidation, deniability, and the code of silence, were useless against this new kind of resistance. Within 30 minutes, the parking lot had been transformed. Where dozens of motorcycles had once stood in threatening formation, now police vehicles dominated the scene. Evidence teams photographed discarded weapons while officers processed a stream of arrested riders. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating a changed Marina. The community members emerged from their positions, store owners, boat captains, mechanics, and dock workers, no longer victims, but victors in a battle they'd chosen to fight together. Sarah walked the marina's perimeter, assessing the aftermath. Tire marks scarred the pavement where bikes had spun out on the wet surface. A few small oil leaks marked spots where motorcycles had gone down. But remarkably, there was minimal damage to property and no serious injuries, a testament to their careful planning. 17 arrests, Martinez reported, falling into step beside her, including Iron Mike and 3 of his top lieutenants. The evidence Lisa gathered gives us enough for multiple RICO charges. But it's not over, Sarah finished. She'd seen that look before in other conflicts on other shores. How many chapters do they have? 12 confirmed along the coast. What happened here today, they'll take it personally. Pride's a powerful motivator in organizations like this. They paused at the fuel dock, where James was treating minor injuries, mostly scrapes and bruises from riders who'd fallen. Even now, he was documenting everything, building evidence for future legal proceedings. Mike approached, wiping grease from his hands. Found something interesting on some of their bikes. Radio equipment, high-end stuff. They were coordinating with someone outside the marina. Lisa, who had emerged from her command center, nodded grimly. Picked up encrypted transmissions during the fight. They were reporting to someone getting orders. Someone higher up the chain. Sarah absorbed this information, her tactical mind already processing implications. The Skull Riders weren't just a motorcycle gang. They were foot soldiers in a larger criminal enterprise. Today's victory, while significant, had just painted a target on their community. Marcus joined their impromptu conference, his expression serious. We need to talk about next steps. The cameras, the security systems, they're good deterrents, but they won't stop a determined attack. And after today, we should expect one. A small crowd had gathered around them. Community members who had fought back and won, but now faced the sobering reality of potential consequences. Sarah saw uncertainty creeping into their expressions, the first hints of doubt about what they'd started. They hit hardest when they're wounded, Martinez added. And we just wounded them badly. Their reputation, their operations, their leadership, we've damaged it all. They'll want payback. The morning's euphoria was fading, replaced by a tense anticipation. Victory had felt clean and simple in the heat of confrontation. Now came the harder part, dealing with the aftermath and preparing for the inevitable response. But as Sarah looked around at the gathered faces, she saw something that gave her hope. The fear that had dominated this community was gone, replaced by a steely determination. These people had tasted victory, had discovered their collective strength. They wouldn't easily surrender that newfound power. So we get ready, she said firmly. We build on what worked today. Strengthen our weaknesses. Expand our network. This was never going to end with one confrontation. The marina's PA system crackled to life, one of the teenage spotters. Incoming vehicles on the coastal road. Black SUVs, no plates. 5 of them. Sarah's expression hardened. Phase 2 was about to begin. The black SUVs rolled into the marina with predatory grace, their tinted windows reflecting the late morning sun. They moved in formation, suggesting military or law enforcement training. This wasn't the brute force of the Skull Riders. This was something more sophisticated. Everyone to defensive positions, Sarah ordered through the radio network. No engagement unless threatened. Lisa, what are you seeing? Vehicles are clean, too clean. No registration records, no plates that match any database. Professional job. Lisa's fingers flew across her keyboard. But their phones are active. Getting data now. The SUVs parked in a semicircle, and the doors opened in unison. Men in expensive suits emerged, a sharp contrast to the leather-clad bikers they'd faced earlier. Their leader was immediately apparent, a tall man with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most boats in the Marina. "My name is Alexander Chase," he announced, his voice carrying the polished accent of old money and expensive schools. "I represent certain business interests that you've inconvenienced today." Sarah studied him through her binoculars. No visible weapons, but his men moved with the careful precision of trained operators. These were professionals, likely ex-military or intelligence, now serving private interests. "Mr. Chase," Detective Martinez stepped forward, badge displayed. "This is an active crime scene. I'm afraid you'll have to leave." Chase smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Detective Martinez, how interesting to find you here. I trust your superiors will be fascinated by your extracurricular activities. Speaking of which," he held up a phone, displaying what appeared to be financial records. "Wire transfers to offshore accounts, evidence tampering, selective enforcement. You've been a very busy detective, haven't you?" Martinez didn't flinch. "Those records are fabricated." "Are they?" "In my experience, the truth matters far less than the appearance of impropriety. I wonder what an internal affairs investigation would discover." Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "That's your play? Threats and blackmail? The same old tactics, just with better suits." Chase turned toward her boat, studying her with cold interest.
Lieutenant Blake.
"You've caused quite a stir. Tell me, do you really think your little community can stand against what's coming? Do you think cameras and improvised defenses will protect you from the full force of our organization?" "No," Sarah replied calmly, "but the live stream of this conversation might." Chase's composure cracked for just a moment as he registered the implications. Every word, every threat had been broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Lisa's team had activated their social media protocols the moment the SUVs appeared. "You're not just fighting one Marina anymore," Sarah continued. "Every community you've terrorized is watching. Every law enforcement agency you've corrupted is under scrutiny. Every politician you've bought is feeling the heat of public attention." The suited men shifted uneasily, hands moving toward concealed weapons. But Chase stopped them with a subtle gesture. His smile had turned brittle. "Impressive opening move, Lieutenant. But the game is far from over. We'll be seeing you again." The SUVs departed as smoothly as they'd arrived, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with new tension. The community had faced down the muscle of the criminal enterprise. Now they'd gotten a glimpse of the real power behind it. "They'll be back," Marcus said quietly. Sarah nodded.
Yes.
"But next time, we'll be ready for them too." The morning's victory suddenly felt smaller in the shadow of what they'd glimpsed. But as Sarah looked around at the determined faces of her community, she knew they wouldn't back down. The real war was just beginning. Night fell over the Marina, bringing with it a deceptive calm. Sarah sat in the cockpit of her sailboat, cleaning her old service pistol more out of habit than necessity. The familiar ritual helped her think, helped her process the day's events and the weight of decisions to come. The Marina had changed in subtle ways. Security lights cast new shadows across the water. Patrols moved with quiet efficiency between the boats. Radio checks punctuated the darkness every 15 minutes. It felt like a forward operating base now, a comparison that bothered Sarah more than she cared to admit. "Can't sleep either?" Marcus appeared on the dock, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She nodded permission for him to come aboard. "Been thinking about Kandahar," she said quietly, accepting one of the cups. "Specifically, the week before everything went sideways. It felt like this, the calm before a storm everyone could sense but nobody could see." Marcus settled into the cockpit, his presence comfortable in the way only another veteran's could be. "The mission that earned you the Silver Star? The mission that cost 3 of my team their lives." Sarah's hands stilled on the pistol. "We had all the intel, all the preparation, all the right moves planned. But when things went wrong..." She fell silent, remembering. The intelligence had been solid, the target legitimate, the plan sound. But they hadn't accounted for the human factor, the desperation of cornered men, the willingness of true believers to die for their cause. 3 good operators had paid the price for that oversight. "This is different," Marcus offered, but Sarah shook her head. "Is it? We bloodied their nose today, showed them they're vulnerable. That makes them desperate. Desperate people do desperate things." From below deck, Lisa's voice called up. "Sarah, you need to see this." The tech expert had transformed the boat's cabin into a command center, screens glowing with data streams and surveillance feeds. She pointed to one monitor showing a series of text messages. "Intercepted these from one of the burner phones we tagged during the SUV visit. They're planning something big. Multiple chapters converging, heavy weapons mentioned. But the concerning part," she highlighted one message. "They're not just coming for us. They're targeting every business that helped us, every person who stood up to them." Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. This was what she'd feared, the enemy adapting, escalating, widening the conflict. Just like Kandahar, when a single firefight had spiraled into a week-long running battle through the city. "How many potential targets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be too many. "At least 30. Lisa scrolled through a list. Amy's coffee shops, Mike's wife's deli, the boat repair shops that helped us, even the teenage spotters' families." The weight of responsibility pressed down on Sarah's shoulders. She'd helped inspire this resistance, had shown people they could fight back. Now those same people were in danger because they'd followed her lead. "We can't protect them all," Marcus said quietly, voicing the tactical reality they both recognized. Sarah stood, moving to the deck, where she could see the Marina stretching out before her. Lights glowed in boat windows where people slept, trusting in the security she'd helped create. The night air carried the sounds of their community, quiet conversations, distant laughter, the gentle clinking of rigging against masts. This wasn't the military operation anymore. This was home. Sarah paced the deck, her mind racing through scenarios, each one darker than the last. The tactics that had worked today wouldn't be enough against what was coming. The enemy would adapt, would find new pressure points, new vulnerabilities to exploit. "Show me the list again," she told Lisa, returning to the cabin. Her eyes scanned the potential targets, not just businesses and homes, but lives and livelihoods. Amy's teenage baristas who'd acted as lookouts. The retired couple who'd let them use their boat as an observation post. James's medical clinic, where he'd documented the gang's victims. "We started something bigger than us," she murmured, more to herself than the others. "Gave people hope, showed them they could fight back. Now they're all in danger because of it." Marcus watched her carefully. "You're thinking about pulling back, aren't you? Trying to contain the damage?" The tactical move would be to concentrate our forces, protect key assets, let the outlying positions go. Sarah's voice was clinical, detached. Standard counterinsurgency doctrine. Give up ground to maintain strength. Lisa looked up from her screens, shocked. "We can't abandon them. These people trusted us." "These people trusted me," Sarah corrected sharply. "And now they're marked for retaliation because I encouraged them to stand up and fight." Her fist slammed against the bulkhead, the dull thud echoing in the cabin. Just like Kandahar. Just like. She stopped herself, but the memories were already surfacing. The local allies who'd helped her team, believing in promises of protection. The devastating reprisals that followed. The faces of those they couldn't save. "Tell me about Kandahar," Lisa said quietly. "What really happened?" Sarah was silent for a long moment, staring at the surveillance feeds without really seeing them. "We were hunting a high-value target. Had good intel from local assets, shopkeepers, teachers, people tired of living under extremist control. They helped us track him, set up the operation. The mission was a success." Her voice turned bitter. "And then we left. Moved on to the next target, the next mission. A week later, those same locals started disappearing. Shops burned. Families threatened. A message to anyone else who might think of helping the Americans." The cabin fell silent except for the quiet hum of computers and the lapping of water against the hull. Sarah's words hung in the air, heavy with implications for their current situation. "But this isn't Kandahar," Marcus said finally. These aren't military assets or intelligence sources. These are our neighbors, our community. And that makes it better? Sarah turned on him, her voice sharp. Makes it easier to put them at risk? To watch them suffer the consequences of standing up to an enemy they weren't prepared to fight. Lisa stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the cabin floor. "Show her," she said to Marcus. "Show her what came in while she was on deck." Marcus pulled out his phone, bringing up a series of messages. Support offers from other marinas. Donations for security equipment. Lists of volunteers willing to help protect threatened businesses. Evidence against the Skull Riders pouring in from communities up and down the coast. "This isn't Kandahar," he repeated softly. "You're not alone this time. And neither are they." Sarah studied the messages on Marcus's phone, her tactical mind already shifting, adapting to this new paradigm. Each offer of support, each volunteer, each piece of shared intelligence represented something she hadn't had in Kandahar, a network of communities united by a common cause. "They're not just fighting for us anymore," Lisa added, pulling up more data. "Look at these posts. A marina in Portland documenting Skull Rider activities. A fishing cooperative in Boston sharing security camera footage. A yacht club in Miami offering their facilities as a safe harbor." The screens around them painted a picture of resistance spreading like wildfire up and down the coast. What had started as one community's stand against intimidation was transforming into something larger, something self-sustaining. "It's not just about protecting them now," Marcus said quietly. "It's about teaching them to protect themselves. And each other." Sarah moved to the boat's charts spread across the navigation table, her fingers tracing the coastline. Not targeting points now, but connection points. Not defensive positions, but community networks. The military commander in her began to see new possibilities, new strategies. "We've been thinking too small," she said finally. "Trying to fight their organization with our community. But what if?" She paused, the ghost of Kandahar finally giving way to a new vision. "What if we build our own organization? Not just here, but everywhere they operate. Turn their hunting grounds into hostile territory." Lisa's fingers flew across her keyboard. "We've already got the infrastructure started. The communication networks, the surveillance sharing, the intelligence gathering. We just need to scale it up." "It's not without risk," Marcus warned. "The bigger this gets, the harder they'll hit back." "Yes," Sarah acknowledged. "But this time we'll be ready. This time we'll have what we didn't have before: depth, redundancy, communities supporting communities." She turned to face them, and both Lisa and Marcus recognized the change in her bearing. The weight of past failures was lifting, replaced by the clarity of new purpose. "In Kandahar, we tried to protect people by fighting their battles for them. We thought our superior training and equipment would be enough." She shook her head. "But real security doesn't come from someone else protecting you. It comes from communities protecting themselves, supporting each other, standing together." The radio crackled with another patrol check-in, and Sarah heard it differently now. Not just guards protecting territory, but citizens reclaiming their community. Not just tactical assets, but neighbors watching out for neighbors. "So, what's the play?" Marcus asked, recognizing the shift in strategy. Sarah moved back to the deck, looking out over the marina. The security lights didn't cast shadows of an operating base anymore. They illuminated a community that had found its strength. "We share everything," she said firmly. "Every tactic that worked today, every piece of intelligence we gather, every lesson we learn. We help other communities set up their own defense networks, their own surveillance systems, their own response plans." She turned back to them, her eyes bright with purpose. "The Skull Riders think they can isolate and intimidate communities one by one. Let's show them what happens when those communities start working together." The night deepened, but the marina's command center grew, increasingly active. Sarah's change in strategy had energized the team. Lisa coordinated with tech-savvy volunteers from other communities, setting up secure communication channels and shared databases. Marcus worked his security contacts, arranging for training programs that could be replicated up and down the coast. "Got something?" Lisa called out suddenly. "One of Amy's baristas just sent an alert. 3 Skull Riders asking questions at the coffee shop downtown, taking photos of staff members. In the past, this news would have triggered an immediate defensive response. But Sarah saw it differently now. They're mapping our network, she said. Let them. In fact, let's help them. She turned to Marcus with a hint of a smile. Remember that speech you gave about becoming a hard target? What if we become a transparent target instead? Understanding dawned on his face. Show them everything except what matters. Let them waste resources documenting what we want them to see. Exactly. Sarah moved to the Marina's security display. We show them our cameras, our patrols, our obvious defenses. Let them think they're gathering intelligence. Lisa caught on quickly. While the real network, the community connections, the support systems, the safe houses, stays hidden in plain sight. Sarah nodded. The Skull Riders understand force and intimidation. Let them focus on that while we build something they don't understand, trust between communities. A call came in from Detective Martinez. Just got word from my contacts. They're moving weapons, lots of them. This isn't going to be like today's confrontation. Good, Sarah replied, surprising everyone. Let them bring their guns and their thugs. Let them think this is a war they can win with force. Because while they're preparing for a fight, we're preparing for something else entirely, Marcus finished. Sarah spread out a coastal map, beginning to mark locations, not military-style objectives, but community connections. Coffee shops that shared information, boat yards that offered safe harbor, mechanics who tracked suspicious vehicles. In Kandahar, we lost because we tried to impose security from the outside, she explained. Here, we're growing it from the inside. Every business they threaten becomes a node in our network. Every person they try to intimidate becomes a connection point for community resistance. The radio crackled again, another patrol check-in, but this time from a neighboring marina that had adopted their protocols. Then another from a fishing boat that had spotted suspicious activity near a known Skull Riders hangout. They're fighting the last war, Sarah said softly, using the same tactics that worked when communities were isolated and afraid. They don't understand that everything changed today. She looked at her small team, the tech expert who'd turned a sailboat into a command center, the security consultant who'd helped ordinary citizens become their own defenders, the detective who'd chosen community over career advancement. We're not just protecting one marina anymore, she declared. We're building something they can't fight with guns or threats or intimidation. We're building hope. Dawn was approaching when Sarah's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She put it on speaker, letting Lisa trace the call. Lieutenant Blake. The smooth voice of Alexander Chase filled the cabin. I thought we should have a private conversation about your future. Sarah caught Lisa's signal. The call was being recorded and broadcast to their secure network. Nothing about this is private anymore, Mr. Chase. That's something you still don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Your little network of communities, your shared intelligence, your civilian resistance. His tone carried a hint of amusement. Impressive, truly. Which is why I'm offering you a chance to end this before it goes too far.
I'm listening.
Sarah's voice was neutral, but her hands had clenched into fists. Join us. Your skills, your leadership, your ability to organize people, they're wasted on this noble but doomed endeavor. We can offer you something better. A position of real power, resources beyond anything your little community can provide. The offer hung in the air. Lisa and Marcus watched Sarah intently, seeing the weight of the moment in her expression. You know, Sarah said finally, I had a similar conversation once in Kandahar. A local warlord offered me a deal. Said I could do more good working within the system than fighting it.
She paused.
3 days later, his men killed 2 families who had helped us. A tragic situation, Chase replied smoothly. But surely you see the difference. We're businessmen, not warlords. We create order, structure, prosperity. You create fear. Sarah cut him off. You profit from people's silence and submission. You destroy communities to control them. Her voice hardened. And you're right, I do see the difference. This time, I'm not just passing through. This time I'm home. The line was silent for a moment. When Chase spoke again, the The false warmth was gone from his voice. Then you understand what comes next. The consequences won't be limited to you. Everyone who's helped you, everyone who's joined your little resistance, they've all made themselves targets. Sarah stood, moving to the deck, where she could see the marina coming alive with early morning activity. Fishing boats heading out, coffee shops opening, ordinary people starting their day with a new sense of purpose and security. No, Mr. Chase. You don't understand what comes next. Every threat you make strengthens us. Every business you target becomes a rallying point. Every community you try to intimidate joins our network. She allowed herself a small smile. You've spent so long using fear as a weapon, you've forgotten what happens when people stop being afraid. Don't be naive, Lieutenant. Fear works. Fear has always worked. Until it doesn't. Look around, Mr. Chase. Look at what happened when one community stood up to your bikers. Count how many others are standing up now. That's not going to stop, no matter what you do to me or anyone else. She ended the call before he could respond, letting the morning breeze clear away the last traces of doubt and hesitation. The worried commander calculating risks was gone, replaced by something new, a leader who had found her true mission. They'll hit us hard now, Marcus warned. Yes, Sarah agreed. But this time, we'll hit back harder. Not with guns or threats, but with something they can't fight. She turned to her team, her eyes bright with purpose. We'll hit back with hope. The sunrise painted the marina in shades of gold and promise, a new day dawning for more than just their community. The real battle was about to begin. The warning came at midnight, a series of urgent alerts lighting up Lisa's monitoring systems. Skull Rider chapters mobilizing along the coast, converging on their location. Police bands crackled with reports of motorcycle convoys moving under cover of darkness. Security cameras from friendly marinas tracked black SUVs, moving with military precision. They're not hiding anymore, Lisa reported, her fingers flying across keyboards. I count at least 80 bikes, plus support vehicles. Multiple chapters coordinating their movements. Sarah stood on her boat's deck, watching the marina's transformation. Security lights blazed across the water, turning night into day. Community members moved with practiced efficiency to their designated positions, no longer civilian volunteers, but a coordinated force hardened by weeks of preparation. Status report, she commanded into her radio. Fishing fleet in position. Captain Chen's voice crackled back. All approaches by water are covered. Road checkpoints established, Marcus added. Fallback positions secured. Medical teams standing by. Network is hot, Lisa confirmed. Every camera, every sensor active. Neighboring communities are monitoring and ready to respond. Sarah studied the tactical display they'd set up in the Marina office. Red showed the approaching forces, not just the obvious motorcycle groups, but the more subtle threats. Unmarked vehicles carrying Chase's professional operators, boats taking position beyond the harbor limits. They're not just coming to punish us, she observed. This is a full operation to retake the coast. They mean to make an example of us. Detective Martinez's voice came through the radio. State police are being redirected by anonymous tips about threats elsewhere. Coast Guard's getting conflicting orders. They've got people in the system running interference. As expected, Sarah replied calmly. That's why we're not relying on official channels. She switched frequencies. All units, implement Protocol Echo. I repeat, Protocol Echo is now active. Across the marina, phones lit up with encrypted messages. The visible security measures, the obvious cameras, the marked patrol boats, the checkpoint barriers, began to power down. Security lights dimmed. To anyone watching, it would appear the defense was falling apart. Think they'll buy it? Marcus asked, joining her on the deck. Sarah's smile was grim. Chase will. He expects us to fail when official support is pulled. He doesn't understand what we've really built here. The approaching forces would find what appeared to be a vulnerable target, its defenses crumbling, its support structure compromised. They wouldn't see the real network until it was too late, the hidden cameras, the civilian observers, the community connections that couldn't be broken by force. First wave approaching from the north, Lisa reported. Skull Rider Advance Team, probably looking to probe our defenses. Sarah nodded, her voice calm as she gave the order that would begin the final battle. Let them come. The first wave of Skull Riders found exactly what they expected, a darkened marina with minimal security presence. 6 bikes rolled slowly past the seemingly abandoned checkpoint, their engines surprisingly quiet. These weren't the same bruisers they'd faced before. These riders moved with tactical precision, professionals disguised as bikers. They're marking targets, Sarah observed through her night vision scope. Communication gear, military-grade weapons. Chase isn't taking chances this time. The lead rider stopped at the Marina office, now dark and apparently deserted. He spoke quietly into a radio, likely reporting the absence of resistance. Sarah could almost imagine Chase's satisfaction at seeing their defenses crumble. Second wave incoming. Lisa's voice whispered through their secure comms. Larger group, multiple directions. The main force arrived like a storm, dozens of motorcycles roaring out of the darkness, followed by the now familiar black SUVs. They moved to secure key points around the marina, their coordination revealing extensive planning. These weren't just gang members, they were a trained assault force. Sarah watched as they began deploying with military efficiency. Teams moved to cut off escape routes, secure high ground, establish fields of fire. They were executing a textbook operation to take and hold territory. They're good, Marcus admitted, watching through his own scope. They're predictable, Sarah corrected. They still think this is a conventional fight. As if to prove her point, Alexander Chase emerged from one of the SUVs, impeccable in his suit despite the hour. He surveyed his forces with obvious satisfaction, clearly believing he had caught them unprepared. Lieutenant Blake, his voice carried across the water. I promised we'd meet again. I see you've wisely chosen to stand down. Perhaps now we can discuss terms of surrender. Sarah's voice, when it came, seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. Lisa's handiwork with the Marina's speaker system. Interesting choice of words, Mr. Chase. Especially since you're the one who's surrounded. Chase's laugh was genuine. Surrounded? By what? Your cameras are down, your patrols have fled, and your law enforcement friends are otherwise occupied. What exactly do you think you have left? Community, Sarah replied simply. At her word, the marina exploded into light, not from security floodlights, but from hundreds of boat cabins and shoreline businesses. Every vessel, every building, every structure suddenly blazed with illumination, revealing Chase's forces caught in the open. The professional operators recognized the danger first, spinning to face multiple directions at once. They found themselves targeted not by guns, but by cameras, hundreds of them, held by ordinary citizens who had been waiting silently in position. Fun fact about marinas, Sarah continued, her voice still seemingly everywhere. Everyone's got a camera these days. Everyone's connected. And everyone's streaming live. Chase's phone buzzed. Then every phone among his forces began to ring and chirp with notifications. Their faces, their weapons, their tactical positions, all were being broadcast live to law enforcement agencies, media outlets, and social media platforms across the country. You thought you could silence one community? Sarah's voice carried a hint of satisfaction now.
Take a look around.
See how many are watching. See how many are standing with us. The professional operators were already backing away, their training telling them the operation was compromised. But the Skull Riders, driven by pride and anger, weren't so quick to retreat. And that's when the second part of Sarah's trap began to close. The waters around the marina came alive as Captain Chen's fishing fleet switched on their own lights, revealing a ring of vessels that had silently taken position during the darkness. Each boat carried volunteers from neighboring marinas, their phones and cameras adding to the wave of surveillance overwhelming Chase's forces. Your mistake, Sarah's voice continued, was thinking we would fight the way you fight, that we'd rely on force and fear.
She paused.
We chose a different weapon. Chase's composure cracked as he saw his tactical advantage evaporate. His forces were caught in a crossfire, not of bullets, but of witnesses. Every move they made, every weapon they carried, every threat they posed was being documented and broadcast in real time. "This is meaningless," he snarled, but his voice carried an edge of desperation. "We still have the superior force. We can still..." "Still what?" Sarah cut him off. "Still intimidate people who aren't afraid anymore? Still threaten communities that stand together? Look at your phones, all of you. See what's happening up and down the coast right now." Lisa's network had sprung to life. Every marina, every port, every waterfront community that had suffered under the Skull Riders' control was now broadcasting their own resistance. Boat owners documenting criminal activities. Business owners sharing evidence of extortion. Workers exposing smuggling operations. The Skull Riders began to break formation, their discipline crumbling as they realized the true nature of their situation. Some gunned their engines, trying to flee, only to find their retreat routes blocked by newly illuminated boats and vehicles. "Detective Martinez," Sarah called out. "I believe you have some arrests to make." Martinez stepped out of the shadows, but she wasn't alone. State police vehicles emerged from hidden positions, their lights suddenly flashing. Coast Guard vessels appeared at the harbor entrance. Federal agents moved in from multiple directions. "Alexander Chase," Martinez announced, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent marina. "You're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, and a list of other charges I'm going to enjoy reading to you." Chase's professional operators melted away into the darkness, abandoning their employer to his fate. The Skull Riders found themselves facing a choice: surrender to the authorities or try to fight their way out through a gauntlet of witnesses and evidence. "This won't save you," Chase spat as Martinez approached with handcuffs. "We have people everywhere. Judges, politicians, police." "Had people everywhere," Sarah corrected him. Amazing how quickly corruption scatters when exposed to light. When people stop being afraid and start standing together. The dawn was breaking now, painting the sky in shades of victory. But Sarah knew this wasn't really the end. It was just the beginning of something much bigger, a new way for communities to protect themselves, to support each other, to stand against intimidation and fear. The real revolution wasn't in the confrontation they'd just won. It was in the network they'd built, the connections they'd forged, the courage they'd inspired in others. The age of shadows and fear was over. The dawn of community power had begun. Not all of the Skull Riders surrendered quietly. A group of hardcore members, led by a lieutenant with a scorpion tattooed on his neck, made a desperate break for the Marina's eastern exit. They charged through the police line, engines roaring in the early morning light. "Let them go," Sarah commanded as several officers moved to pursue. "They're heading right where we want them." The fleeing bikers found themselves herded by strategically parked vehicles and barriers into a narrow channel between two rows of boats. As they accelerated, confident in their escape, the trap sprung. Fire suppression systems activated, coating the pavement with a slick foam that sent bikes sliding. Marcus's security team emerged from concealed positions, taking down riders with practiced efficiency as they struggled to keep their machines upright. No shots fired, no brutal violence, just the methodical application of superior preparation and tactical positioning. "Western Group is trying something similar," Lisa reported from her command center. "But they're going to have a nasty surprise when they hit the bridge." Sure enough, another group of riders found their escape route blocked by a jackknife delivery truck, courtesy of Mike's quick thinking and perfect timing. As they wheeled around to find another way out, they rode straight into the waiting arms of state police tactical units. Chase watched it all unfold from the back of a police cruiser, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his composure finally shattered. "You have no idea what you've done," he called out to Sarah as Martinez read him his rights. "The people I work for, they won't let this stand." Sarah approached the cruiser, studying the man who had seemed so threatening just hours before. "You still don't understand what's really happened here, do you? Your people relied on staying in the shadows, on people being too afraid to stand together. That world is gone." As if to underscore her point, more vehicles were arriving. Not police this time, but ordinary citizens. Shop owners from neighboring towns coming to support their allies. Boat owners from up and down the coast arriving to stand with their fellow mariners. The very people Chase's organization had tried to intimidate and control were now witnessing its downfall. Target the weak ones first, Chase sneered. That's always been the rule. Break their spirit, make examples of them. It's worked for years. And now, Sarah gestured to the scene around them. Look around. Really look. Where are the weak ones? Where are the easy targets? All I see are communities that have learned to stand together. People who've discovered their own strength. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the full scope of what had happened. The marina was crowded now with celebration and purpose. Evidence teams photographed weapons and contraband discovered in the SUVs. Detective Martinez coordinated with federal agents who had arrived to take custody of key suspects. But more importantly, people were coming together. Neighbors who had once hurried past each other in fear now stood in groups, sharing stories and offers of support. Business owners who had paid protection money in silence were now giving statements to authorities. The shadow of fear that had hung over the waterfront for so long was lifting, burned away by the light of community action and shared courage. Lisa's voice cut through the morning activity. Sarah, you need to see this. It's happening everywhere. The command center screens showed scenes from up and down the coast. In Boston, shop owners were removing Skull Rider protection stickers from their windows, replacing them with community watch emblems. In Miami, marina workers were changing locks on storage units that had been used for smuggling operations. In Portland, fishing boats were blocking access to hidden coves that had served as drop points. They're not just documenting anymore, Marcus observed. They're reclaiming their territories. Sarah watched as years of criminal infrastructure crumbled in a matter of hours. The network they'd built hadn't just shared information. It had created a blueprint for resistance that communities everywhere could follow. Detective Martinez burst into the command center, her eyes bright with excitement. Chase broke. Started naming names as soon as he realized his contacts weren't answering his calls. Judges, port authorities, corrupt officers. He's giving up everyone. Of course he is, Sarah nodded. Men like Chase don't have loyalty. They only understand power. And now that power's shifting, he'll do anything to save himself. Reports kept flooding in. State police raid on a Skull Riders clubhouse revealed evidence of decades of criminal activities. Coast Guard intercepted 3 ships carrying contraband, their captains suddenly eager to cooperate. FBI teams were executing search warrants on businesses identified in Chase's initial confession. But the most significant changes were happening at the community level. People who had lived in fear were stepping forward, not just to report crimes, but to help protect each other. The network Sarah had helped build was evolving beyond its original purpose, becoming a framework for community cooperation and mutual support. Think they'll try to rebuild? Marcus asked, watching another group of arrested Skull Riders being led away. Sarah shook her head. Not here. Not anywhere people have learned to stand together. She turned to Lisa. How many communities are connected to our network now? 117 as of 10 minutes ago, Lisa reported. More joining every hour. They're sharing everything: security protocols, surveillance techniques, coordination strategies. And something else. She pulled up a series of messages. They're helping each other rebuild, offering resources, support, whatever's needed to recover from years of exploitation. The marina had become a hub of activity. News crews were arriving, drawn by the viral videos of the night's events. But they weren't just covering a crime story anymore. They were documenting a revolution in community empowerment. Sarah watched as Amy's coffee shop staff handed out drinks to tired volunteers, as Mike's wife organized food distribution for the gathered crowd, as James treated minor injuries and collected final pieces of evidence. This wasn't just a victory over criminals. It was a triumph of connection over intimidation, of hope over fear. The last of Chase's forces were being processed, their weapons cataloged, their vehicles impounded. But Sarah knew the real work was just beginning. Communities up and down the coast would need help building their own networks, establishing their own defenses, creating their own versions of what had happened here. So, Marcus said quietly, "What's next?" Sarah smiled, watching the sun climb higher over their transformed marina. Now we help others do what we did. We share what we've learned. We build something that can't be broken by force or fear. The shadow of the Skull Riders was gone, but something stronger had taken its place, the unshakable power of communities united in purpose and hope. 1 month after the showdown at the Marina, Sarah sat in Amy's coffee shop, reviewing reports on her laptop. The wall behind the counter, once bare, now displayed a collection of community awards and newspaper clippings. The largest headline read, "Coastal Communities Unite to End Criminal Empire." "Your usual," Amy said, placing a steaming cup beside her. The young barista had changed in subtle ways. She carried herself with new confidence, and the scared look that had once haunted her eyes was gone. "Did you see the latest numbers?" Sarah nodded, scrolling through Lisa's daily update. 243 communities now connected through their network. 37 Skull Rider chapters disbanded. Over 400 arrests, including judges, police officers, and port officials who had facilitated Chase's operations. But the most significant changes couldn't be captured in statistics. They were visible in the little things: the elderly couple walking the docks at night without fear, the business owners gathering for morning coffee instead of hiding in their shops, the children playing freely along the waterfront. Marcus entered the coffee shop, followed by a group of visitors from a South Carolina marina. The network had evolved into a kind of informal training program, with communities sending representatives to learn from their experience. "Another success story," he reported, settling into a chair. They drove out their local Skull Rider chapter last week. No violence, no confrontation, just coordinated community action. The riders showed up one morning and found every business closed to them, every dock watching them, every movement documented. Sarah smiled, remembering Chase's words about targeting the weak ones first. His organization had never understood that true strength didn't come from intimidation or force, but from people standing together. Detective Martinez called. Amy added, bringing more coffee for the visitors. "The Federal Task Force wants your input on community-based crime prevention programs. They're talking about implementing similar networks in other regions." The bell above the door chimed as Lisa hurried in, her laptop under her arm. "You're going to want to see this," she said, pulling up a video. It showed communities along the Gulf Coast adopting their methods to combat different criminal organizations. The strategy they developed was spreading, evolving, adapting to new challenges. "It's not just about fighting crime anymore," Lisa explained. "Communities are using the network to help each other with all sorts of things: disaster preparation, economic development, environmental protection. They're building something bigger than we imagined." Sarah watched the video, seeing their tactics being used in new ways, their network expanding beyond its original purpose. What had started as a defense against intimidation had grown into a movement for community empowerment. The coffee shop buzzed with energy as more people arrived, local business owners meeting with visitors from other towns, sharing stories and strategies. The fear that had once kept people isolated was gone, replaced by a sense of connection and shared purpose. The marina had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Security cameras still watched over the docks, but they weren't the primary deterrent anymore. The real security came from the community itself: boat owners who knew their neighbors, workers who looked out for each other, businesses that operated as part of an interconnected network. Sarah walked the familiar paths between the boats, stopping to chat with people she'd once only known in passing. Mike was teaching a group of youngsters about boat maintenance, passing on skills that would help them find work in other marinas. James had expanded his medical practice to include a free clinic for maritime workers, staffed by volunteer doctors from connected communities. "Remember when this was all just about stopping the Skull Riders?" Marcus asked, falling into step beside her. He gestured toward a group of women practicing self-defense techniques on the dock, Caroline's idea, now implemented in marinas up and down the coast. "It was never just about stopping them," Sarah replied. "We just didn't know it at the time." They passed the marina office, where Lisa had set up a permanent technology center. Through the window, they could see her training a group of senior citizens on cybersecurity and surveillance systems. The oldest student was Mr. Peterson, a retired fisherman who now ran the marina's early warning network with surprising skill. "Got the latest report from Martinez," Marcus said, holding up his phone. "Chase's trial starts next month. His testimony has led to indictments all the way up to the state level. Politicians, business leaders, even some federal officials. The whole corrupt network is unraveling. Sarah nodded, but her attention was on a small ceremony taking place near the fuel dock. Amy was presenting completion certificates to her first class of Community Watch trainees, regular citizens who'd learned to identify suspicious activities and coordinate responses through the network. "They don't need us anymore," she observed with satisfaction. "They've found their own strength." The afternoon sun glinted off the water as boats returned from their daily runs. Fishing vessels shared the channel with pleasure craft, their crews exchanging waves and greetings. The invisible barriers that had once divided different parts of the maritime community had dissolved. A group of teenagers, the same ones who had acted as spotters during the showdown, were teaching younger kids how to use the communication systems responsibly. They'd turned their tech skills into a youth program, building the next generation of community defenders. Seattle called, Marcus mentioned as they reached Sarah's boat. "They want to adapt our program for their port communities. Different challenges, same principles." Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from military commander to community leader. "Send them everything we've learned. Every success, every failure, every lesson. That's how this works. We all grow stronger together." The sound of laughter drew their attention to a barbecue being set up on the main dock. These weekly community dinners had started spontaneously after the showdown and had become a tradition. Tonight's gathering was larger than usual, with visitors from 3 different states joining the celebration. The shadows of the past, the fear, the isolation, the helplessness, had been replaced by something brighter, something stronger, something that couldn't be broken by force or threat or intimidation. The community had found its voice, its strength, its purpose. And that was a victory that would last. 6 months after the showdown, Sarah stood at her boat's helm, guiding it through familiar waters. But this trip was different. Behind her sailed a flotilla of vessels from up and down the coast, fishing boats, sailboats, cabin cruisers, each representing a community that had joined their network. They were headed to what had once been a Skull Riders' hidden cove, now transformed into the first of many community training centers. The same waters that had once concealed criminal activities would now host programs teaching maritime safety, environmental protection, and community defense. "Convoy looking good," Lisa's voice crackled over the radio. She was coordinating the movement from her new command center, a proper facility funded by donations from grateful business owners and staffed by trained volunteers. Marcus's security boat pulled alongside, carrying a group of instructors from 3 different states. What had started as basic self-defense classes had evolved into comprehensive community protection programs, teaching everything from cybersecurity to emergency response. "Got word from Martinez," he called across the water. Final sentencing came down for Chase. 25 to life, plus asset forfeiture. The properties they seized are being converted into community centers and job training facilities. Sarah nodded, thinking about how far they'd come. The camera on her bow, one of hundreds now linked in their coastal network, caught the morning sun. These devices, once symbols of surveillance and control, had become tools of community empowerment. A small fishing boat passed, its crew waving. Sarah recognized the captain, one of many who had once paid protection money to the Skull Riders. Now he was part of a cooperative that helped new fishermen get started, breaking the cycle of exploitation that had trapped so many. The cove came into view, its entrance marked by new signs. Coastal Community Alliance Training Center. The name had been chosen by vote, reflecting the democratic principles that guided everything they did now. As the flotilla anchored, Sarah saw familiar faces among the gathered crowd on shore. Amy was there with her baristas, now trained as Community Outreach Coordinator.
RS.
Mike stood with a group of maritime workers who had become instructors in boat safety and maintenance. James had set up a medical station, continuing his mission of caring for the maritime community. But there were new faces too, representatives from inland communities wanting to adapt their methods for different environments. The network was growing beyond the coast, spreading to wherever people needed to stand together against intimidation and exploitation. "Remember when you thought this was just about defending one marina?" Marcus asked, helping secure the boats. Sarah watched as people gathered on the shore, greeting each other like old friends. The barriers that had once divided communities, geography, class, background, had dissolved in the face of shared purpose and mutual support. "It was never just about defense," she replied. "It was about showing people their own strength, about reminding them that fear only works when we face it alone." The morning breeze carried the sound of conversation and laughter across the water. These waters, once ruled by fear and force, had become something else entirely, a symbol of what communities could achieve when they stood together. 1 year to the day after Sarah had first confronted the Skull Riders on her dock, she stood at the podium of the newly established Maritime Community Center, addressing representatives from over 300 coastal communities. The former warehouse, once used for storing smuggled goods, now hummed with purpose and possibility. "A year ago, we faced a choice," she began, looking out over the gathered faces. "Submit to intimidation or stand together." What happened next surprised even me, not because we fought back, but because of what we built in the process. The walls around her told the story. Maps showed the spread of their network, now extending far beyond the coast. Screens displayed real-time data from community monitoring systems. But more importantly, the room was filled with people who had found their own strength. "The Skull Riders thought they could control us through fear," she continued. "They didn't understand that fear is only powerful when we face it alone. Together, we're not just strong, we're unbreakable." Detective Martinez, recently promoted to lead a new community-focused task force, stood among the audience. Next to her was Lisa, now running a nonprofit that helped communities establish their own security networks. Marcus had turned his security company into a training organization, teaching communities how to protect themselves. "But this isn't about what we defeated," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "It's about what we've created. Look around you. Every person here has a story of transformation. Every community represented has found its voice, its strength, its purpose." She gestured to Amy, who had opened 2 more coffee shops, each serving as a community hub and training center. To Mike, whose boat repair program had given dozens of young people new careers and purpose. To James, whose medical outreach program had expanded to serve maritime communities up and down the coast. "A year ago, we thought we were fighting criminals. But we were actually building something much more powerful, a network of communities that support each other, protect each other, lift each other up." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the faces of people who had once lived in fear but now stood tall with pride and purpose. The shadow of the Skull Riders had faded, replaced by something brighter and more enduring. "This is our victory," Sarah concluded, her voice strong with conviction. "Not that we drove out those who would exploit us, but that we discovered who we really are. Not victims, not targets, but communities united in purpose and hope." As applause filled the room, Sarah looked out over the gathered crowd, boat owners and dock workers, business leaders and volunteers, young and old, all part of something larger than themselves. The fear that had once divided them had become the catalyst that brought them together. Outside, the marina bustled with life. Boats came and went freely, their crews no longer looking over their shoulders in fear. Children played on the docks, their laughter carrying across waters that had once been ruled by intimidation. The community had not just survived, it had transformed, becoming a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges. The shadow of Kandahar, of past failures and lost battles, had finally lifted from Sarah's shoulders. She had found something she couldn't find in military victories: the power of community, the strength of people standing together, the unshakable force of hope replacing fear. The war was over, and something much better had taken its place.
The end.
Would you like me to summarize the key themes and impacts of the story?
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.